24 years of marriage ended on a Tuesday evening when my flight home was canceled. My wife didn't know I was coming. Neither did my business partner. That's the only reason I found out the truth. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She looked at me from across our bedroom and said, "You want the truth? I felt nothing for you in years." Then she turned back to the man in my bed like I was an inconvenience she'd deal with later. I walked out without saying a word. By the time the sun came up, I had already decided what I was going to do. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 52 years old, and 3 weeks ago I thought I had built something worth keeping. I own Mercer Holt Design and Construction, a mid-sized firm based out of Atlanta that I started from nothing 20 years ago with my college roommate Ray Holt. We met freshman year at Georgia Tech, argued constantly about everything from football to structural load calculations, and somehow ended up closer for it. After graduation, we both worked for other people for a few years, hated it, and decided to take the risk together. What started as 2 guys working out of my spare bedroom turned into a firm with 22 employees, offices in Atlanta and Savannah, and a reputation we'd spent 2 decades building. I met my wife at a friend's cookout the summer after we launched the business. She was sharp, funny, and completely unimpressed by my ambition, which was the most attractive thing about her. We dated for 8 months before I proposed. We got married in a small ceremony in the North Georgia mountains, and 3 years later our daughter Leah was born. My wife quit her marketing job when Leah was 2, and eventually went back to work part-time as an event coordinator once Leah started school. Life settled into a rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it felt solid. It felt real. Leah just graduated from UNC Chapel Hill in May with a degree in communications. We'd thrown a party at the house, invited both families, and Ray had given a toast that made my wife laugh so hard she spilled her wine. That was 6 weeks ago. I remember thinking that evening, standing in the backyard watching the people I love most, that I was a lucky man. The Tuesday, everything collapsed. I'd been in Charlotte for a 2-day meeting with a developer who wanted us to bid on a residential complex outside the city. The meeting ran long on Monday, and I'd booked a hotel for the night expecting to wrap everything up Tuesday morning. But the developer pushed to Wednesday, and I didn't want to sit in a hotel room doing nothing. So I rebooked my flight for Tuesday evening. I texted my wife to let her know I was heading back early. She didn't respond, but that wasn't unusual. She sometimes left her phone on silent when she was in the middle of something. I landed at Hartsfield at 6:45, grabbed my bag from the carousel, and drove home. The house was quiet when I pulled into the driveway. My wife's car was there, and so was a silver Lexus I recognized immediately. Ray drove a silver Lexus SUV. I'd ridden in it 100 times. I sat in my car for a full minute trying to come up with an explanation that made sense. Maybe she'd had a few drinks and he was checking on her. Maybe she wasn't feeling well and he'd stopped by on his way home. Maybe I was catastrophizing over a parked car. I went inside. The downstairs was empty. I heard music coming from upstairs, something low and unfamiliar. I climbed the stairs slowly, not because I was being careful, but because some part of my body had already understood what my mind was still refusing to accept, and it was moving through something thick. I pushed open the bedroom door. My wife was in our bed. Ray was beside her. They both turned at the sound of the door. Ray's face went white. He sat up and grabbed the sheet and started saying my name over and over like repetition would change what I was looking at. My wife didn't flinch. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as exhausted, like I had walked in on something tedious rather than on the moment our entire life together split in half. "Daniel," she said, "you weren't supposed to be back until Thursday." I didn't speak. I stood in the doorway holding my travel bag, unable to move, unable to look away. Ray kept talking. He was sorry. He didn't mean for this to happen. It wasn't what it looked like. I remember thinking distantly that it was exactly what it looked like. I remember thinking distantly that it was exactly what it looked like, and that was the problem. "Stop," my wife said to him. Then she looked at me and something shifted in her face. Not guilt, something colder. "You want the truth?" she said. "I felt nothing for you in years. Nothing." I nodded once. I turned around and walked back down the stairs. I heard Ray call my name. I heard my wife tell him to let me go. I got in my car, backed out of the driveway, and drove to my office in Midtown Atlanta. I sat in the dark in my own office chair, still in my travel clothes, staring at the city lights through the glass, and I didn't move for 2 hours. My phone buzzed constantly. My wife. Ray. My wife again. I turned it face down on the desk. Whatever either of them had prepared to say, I wasn't ready to hear it. She'd already given me her version of the truth. I didn't need another one. Around midnight, I called Marcus, my college friend, who now practiced family law in Buckhead. He answered on the third ring, heard 2 sentences of what I told him, and said he'd meet me at his office at 8 in the morning. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat back in my chair and started thinking clearly for the first time all evening. I'd spent 20 years solving complicated problems. Site surveys that came back wrong. Contractors who cut corners. Permits that stalled. Clients who changed their minds at the worst possible moment. I had trained myself to approach a crisis the way a surgeon approaches a wound. Clinically, systematically, without emotion getting in the way until the immediate damage was controlled. I told myself this was just another problem. The worst one I'd ever faced, but still a problem. And the best thing I could do right now was think. First, money. Our joint checking account held about $60,000. The accumulation of direct deposits and money we hadn't moved into investments yet. It was a joint account, which meant she had equal access. I opened my banking app and transferred $40,000 into a personal savings account I'd had since before we were married. The one I'd never added her to because it had started as a small inheritance from my uncle, and it had just never come up. I left $20,000 in the joint account. I wasn't trying to strand her. I was trying to protect what was mine, until the lawyers could establish what was what. Then I went through the credit cards. She was an authorized user on 2 of them. I called the first bank at 7 in the morning when they opened and had her removed. The second one followed. I scrolled through the recent statements while I was on hold, and what I found made my jaw tighten. Hotel charges in Atlanta and Savannah on dates I'd been traveling for work. A weekend charge in Highlands, North Carolina, from 2 months ago that I remembered my wife telling me, was a girl's trip with her friend Donna. Restaurant bills for 2 at places we'd never been to together. The pattern went back at least 8 months. At 8 o'clock, I was sitting across from Marcus. He's known me since we were 20 years old. And he has a way of being completely honest with you without making it feel like an attack. He listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." I spent the rest of that morning in his conference room going through documents he printed for me, signing things, making calls. By noon, I had the beginnings of a divorce filing, a clear picture of what the prenuptial agreement we'd signed actually protected, and a separate meeting scheduled with a forensic accountant Marcus recommended who specialized in family asset cases. I went back to my office after lunch. I had emails to answer. I had a construction timeline to review for a project in Decatur. Life didn't pause because mine had detonated. So I worked, and in the spaces between phone calls and emails, I dealt with the other thing. The house was in my name. We'd bought it 9 years ago, and I'd handled the financing, the mortgage, everything. I called the mortgage servicer, not to do anything drastic, but to make a note in the file and understand my options. I called the utilities and confirmed all the accounts were in my name. I wasn't going to shut anything off while she was still living there and the legal process was running. But I wanted to understand what I controlled. That afternoon, I drove to the house to get my things. Marcus had offered to come, but I told him I could handle it. I just needed to get in and out before she came back. Her car wasn't there when I arrived. I used my key and went upstairs to the bedroom. The bed was made with fresh sheets. The room tidied like nothing had happened. I pulled a duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet and started filling it methodically. Clothes, shoes, toiletries, my laptop from the desk in the corner, the external hard drive that had 20 years of project files on it. Then I went to my study down the hall. The study was the one room in the house that was entirely mine. Drafting table, I never used anymore. Bookshelves full of architecture texts and photography books, and in the top right-hand drawer of my desk, a black leather box. Inside that box was my father's watch, a stainless steel Rolex Datashus that he'd worn every day for 30 years, that he pressed into my hand 2 weeks before he died from a stroke when I was 34, that I hadn't been able to bring myself to wear because it felt too close to something I wasn't ready to carry yet. I kept it there. I'd shown it to my wife the year after my father died. She'd held it carefully and said it was beautiful. I opened the drawer. The leather box was gone. I went through the entire desk. Every drawer, every shelf. I checked the closet in the study, the shelf above the door. I looked in places I knew I hadn't put it because by then I was looking everywhere. Nothing. I stood in the middle of that room for a long moment. Then I went back to the bedroom and searched every drawer, Every shelf in the closet, the nightstand. Not there. On my way out through the kitchen, I noticed a folded piece of paper tucked under the edge of the fruit bowl on the counter. Not addressed to anyone. Just a receipt from a luxury resale shop on Peachtree Street. One men's Rolex Datejust, stainless circa 1987. Sold for $2,400. Dated 11 days ago. I stood in my kitchen holding that receipt and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was a colder thing. Something that settled in my chest like concrete hardening. She had taken my father's watch from my desk, from the one room in the house that was mine, and sold it. Not because she needed the money. Not because she didn't know what it meant. She knew exactly what it meant. Sigh. She knew exactly what it meant. That's why she did it. I put the receipt in my jacket pocket, picked up my bags, and walked out. Back in my office, I sat down and stared at nothing for a while. My phone had been buzzing all day. I'd been ignoring most of it, but I scrolled through the text now to see what story was being constructed. My wife's messages had gone through several phases in the past 24 hours. First, flat and unapologetic. We need to talk. Then impatient. You can't just disappear, Daniel. That's not how adults handle things. Then something close to panic once she realized the bank accounts had changed. What did you do? Half the money is gone. Call me. Then the tone shifted again, softer, calculated. I know you're hurting. I understand that. But we've been together 24 years. Don't throw that away. Think about Leah. Ray's texts were different, more careful, more strategic, and they shifted from personal to professional quickly. Dan, I know this is bad, but we need to talk about the business. There are 3 active projects that need both of us at the table. Whatever is happening between us personally, we can't let it affect the firm or the people who work for us. I didn't respond to either of them. What I hadn't expected was the text I got at 7 that evening from a number I didn't immediately recognize. I almost ignored it, but the first line stopped me. Mr. Mercer, my name is Sandra Briggs. I work with your wife at the event company. I have information you need to hear. I'm sorry to contact you this way, but I didn't know what else to do. I called the number immediately. A woman answered, her voice careful and slightly nervous. She'd worked alongside my wife for 3 years. She'd known about the affair for 6 months, she said, because my wife had confided in her early on when it was still new, and my wife thought she could trust her. Sandra had kept the secret longer than she was comfortable with, and she'd been trying to convince herself it wasn't her place to say anything. But she'd seen the way I was being portrayed in the office, as cold and emotionally absent, as someone who had essentially checked out of the marriage years ago. And she'd watched my wife use that narrative to justify what she was doing. And Sandra had decided she couldn't stay quiet. How long? I asked. At least 9 months that I know of, Sandra said. Probably longer. She mentioned you had gone on a firm retreat last fall. I think that might have been when it started. Last October. I'd been in the North Carolina mountains for a long weekend with the team. I remember my wife saying she was going to Savannah with her sister while I was gone. I remember coming home and thinking she seemed distant. I'd assumed she was tired. There was something else, Sandra said. She'd hesitated before telling me this part, but she thought I should know. Ray had been telling my wife he was going to leave his fiancée, Claire Donovan. They'd been engaged for 8 months. The engagement party had been in April. I'd attended it. I'd stood in Ray's living room holding a glass of champagne and toasted to his future. Sandra didn't know if Ray had actually told Claire anything, but she thought Claire deserved to know what was happening. I thanked Sandra quietly and sat with what she'd told me for a long time. I'd known Claire Donovan for 2 years. She was warm and direct and genuinely kind, and watching her at that engagement party, I thought Ray was the luckiest person in the room and probably didn't fully understand that yet. She deserved to know. Not from my wife, not from Ray's version, but from me. It took me 40 minutes to figure out what to write. I kept deleting it and starting over. Finally, I settled on direct and simple, because she didn't need my careful language. She needed the facts. Claire, this is Daniel Mercer. I'm sorry to reach out this way. I need you to know that Ray has been having an affair with my wife. I found out 2 days ago when I came home early from a work trip. I'm going through a divorce. I thought you deserved to hear this from me directly. I have documentation if you want it. I'm available to talk whenever you're ready. I sat with my thumb over the send button for a minute, then I pressed it. She responded 20 minutes later. 1 sentence. How long? 9 months minimum, I told her. Probably longer. Her next message took a while to come. When it arrived, it was longer. She'd noticed changes in Ray over the past year, she wrote. Later nights. A new distance. She'd confronted him about it twice, and he'd said it was work stress, that the firm was going through a growth phase, and he was carrying more than usual. She believed him because she wanted to believe him. Because everything else in their life together seemed right. She asked if she could call me in the morning. We spoke for 45 minutes the next day. She was composed in a way that seemed like it was costing her a great deal. She asked specific, careful questions, and I answered all of them honestly. Before we hung up, she said she was going to need some time to think about what to do next. 2 days later, she called me back. I went through the business accounts, she said. Claire was a CPA. She'd worked in corporate finance for 15 years. She had access to Ray's personal files because she'd been helping him organize their joint finances since the engagement. He gave me his login months ago. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed to understand what I was looking at. What she found took her most of a night to document. Ray had been billing personal expenses as client entertainment and professional development through the firm's operating accounts for over a year. Hotels, dinners, weekend travel, charges in cities where the firm had no clients and no active projects. He'd been approving his own expense reports using his partner access, which I had trusted him to use responsibly because we'd been doing this for 20 years, and I had never had any reason not to. The total, as far as Claire could calculate it, was somewhere around $48,000. I was quiet for a moment after she finished telling me. I have copies of everything, she said. What do you want to do with this? I called my lawyer Marcus before we even hung up. Then I called our firm's outside accountant. Then I called Richard Crane, who served as the independent director on our small advisory board, a man I'd known professionally for 12 years and trusted completely. I laid out everything Claire had found and told him I needed the board to convene as quickly as possible. Richard called me back the next morning. He'd reviewed Claire's documentation. He'd also pulled the firm's books for the past 14 months. His voice was measured and grave when he told me the board was scheduling an emergency meeting for the following Tuesday. He said they would need to act quickly and that the findings, if confirmed, were serious enough to warrant referral to the district attorney's office. The Tuesday meeting happened without me in the room, which was the right call given that I was personally involved. I sat at a coffee shop 3 blocks from our office and waited. Richard called me at 11:27. The board had voted unanimously. Ray was terminated as a partner effective immediately. His access to all firm accounts, systems, and facilities had been revoked. The matter was being referred to the Fulton County DA's office for investigation of fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. A civil recovery action was also being initiated. I thanked Richard and sat for a long moment with my coffee going cold. There was a part of me that had spent 20 years in partnership with this man. A part that remembered driving through a snowstorm at 2 a.m. to rescue him from a breakdown on I-288 when we were 26. A part that had given a toast at his first engagement, which hadn't worked out, and then watched him rebuild himself, and thought I was watching someone I knew well enough to trust with everything. That part of me had been wrong, and I didn't know yet how long it would take to understand exactly what that meant. My wife found out about the board meeting before I could tell her. I don't know who told her, maybe Ray. Maybe someone at the office. She called me 4 times in 30 minutes that afternoon. I let them all go to voicemail. Then a text came through. Not from her. From Leah. Dad, I need to talk to you. Mom called me. She's saying you're trying to destroy her and Ray because you're angry. She said you froze her accounts, and now you've gotten Ray fired. She's really upset. Is this true? I called my daughter immediately. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear from her voice that she'd been crying. We're close to it. I told her I was coming to see her. She was staying at a friend's apartment in Decatur while she looked for her first job, 20 minutes from my office. I drove over and sat with her at her kitchen table and told her everything. All of it. From the moment I walked into the bedroom to the receipt in the kitchen to Claire's accounting, I didn't spare details to protect my wife's image because I wasn't willing to let my daughter be fed her version of events designed to make me the villain. Leah was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she called it a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. She said it like she was testing the word, feeling how absurd it was. Then she looked at me and said, Dad, where are you staying? In my office, I told her. Sleeping on the couch in the conference room. She told me that was not acceptable, and that she was coming with me to find an apartment that afternoon. We found a 2-bedroom place in Virginia Highland in 2 days. It wasn't large, but it had high ceilings and good light and a small balcony that looked out over a street full of oak trees. Leah helped me pick out the basics. We ate takeout on the floor the first night because there were no chairs yet. And she made me laugh twice, which I hadn't expected. She told me she loved me and that she was angry at her mother and that she needed time before she could talk to her. And I told her she didn't owe anyone a timeline. She nodded and leaned against my shoulder, and we sat like that for a while without talking. Marcus had been working steadily in the background through all of this. He called me the Friday after the board meeting with news. My wife's attorney had reached out. She was willing to sign the divorce papers without contesting the settlement if I agreed not to pursue criminal charges against her separately for the stolen watch. There were no criminal charges on the table related to the watch. That was a civil matter. But her attorney was fishing for any concession that would reduce her exposure. She's scared, Marcus said. She should be, I said. But the answer is no. The terms stay as they are. The prenup covers the business assets. She has no claim on the firm equity. She walks away with what she came into the marriage with, plus her fair share of the joint assets accumulated over the marriage, minus whatever I can document she spent on the affair. Marcus said that was exactly right, and that he'd tell them. The following week, I did something I'd been putting off. I drove to the luxury resale shop on Peachtree. I'd called ahead and spoken to the manager, who confirmed that the watch was still in inventory, and that the original seller had signed a standard consignment agreement, which meant there was a buyback window that hadn't yet closed. I paid what they asked. It was more than my wife had sold it for, obviously. I didn't care about that. When the manager brought it out and set the leather box on the glass counter, I stood there for a moment before opening it. When I did, the watch looked exactly as I remembered it, scratched on the crystal in one place, the way my father had worn it through 30 years of construction sites and board meetings and Saturday mornings fixing things in the garage. I closed the box and held it in my hand for a moment. You're lucky, the manager said. We had 2 inquiries on it this week. I put it in my jacket pocket and walked out. Claire Donovan filed for divorce the same week the DA's office opened a formal investigation into Ray's conduct at the firm. I'd sent her flowers when I found out her filing had gone through. Her note back was brief. Moving forward. Thank you for telling me the truth. Ray's attorney made one attempt to have the board's action reversed, arguing that the partnership agreement required mediation before termination. Our attorney cited the fraud provisions in that same agreement, which bypassed the mediation requirement in cases of fiduciary violation. The argument went nowhere. The divorce settlement was finalized 6 weeks after I filed. My wife signed everything. She didn't contest the prenuptial agreement, didn't fight the documentation of affair-related expenditures from joint accounts, didn't challenge the property division. She moved into an apartment near her sister's place in Sandy Springs, and as far as I know, she's still working at the event company. I don't follow up on her life. That chapter is done. The morning after the settlement was signed, I was standing in my kitchen in the Virginia Highland apartment making coffee when my phone rang. It was Leah. "How are you?" she asked. I thought about it for a second. Not the reflex answer, but the real one. "Clearer than I've been in years," I said. There was a pause on her end. Then she said, "That's what I thought. You sound different. Lighter or something." She was coming over for dinner that evening. She'd been over twice a week since I moved in, usually with containers of food she'd made or picked up, always with an opinion about what I still needed to buy for the apartment. A real couch. Curtains that weren't from a department store clearance rack. Art for the walls. I've been buying things slowly, deliberately, choosing everything myself for the first time in a long time. The firm was settling into its new shape. We'd brought in a managing director on an interim basis, while I searched for a permanent partner, someone whose name I'd known in the industry for years, and who brought exactly the kind of steady operational expertise that would complement what I did well. The first meeting we had together in my office ran 2 hours and covered 3 ongoing projects and a bid we were preparing. It felt like the beginning of something that would actually hold. The watch was back in its leather box, but I'd moved it. It wasn't in the desk drawer anymore. It was on my nightstand, where I could see it in the morning. I wasn't ready to wear it yet, but I was closer than I'd been. On a Saturday morning about 2 months after everything had happened, I was on the balcony with coffee watching the street below, and I thought about the man I'd been 4 months ago, the one who had stood in a doorway holding a travel bag, unable to speak, unable to move, staring at the complete destruction of a life he'd assumed was stable. I had spent 24 years trusting the wrong person, maybe longer than that. I had missed things I should have seen. I had accepted distance where I should have asked questions. I didn't know whether those were failures or just the ordinary blindness that comes from loving someone and not wanting to look too hard. What I knew was this. I had a daughter who was still learning how to trust the world, and she needed to see that betrayal wasn't the end of something worth building. I had a business that 22 people depended on, and it was standing. I had my father's watch on my nightstand, and I would wear it when I was ready. I had a small balcony and a good cup of coffee, and the specific, quiet feeling of a life that was entirely, honestly mine. I wasn't fixed. I wasn't over it. There were still mornings when something snagged in my chest before I was fully awake, when the silence of the apartment felt like an accusation. But underneath that, solid and patient, was something I hadn't felt in years without knowing I'd lost it. I was okay, not the performance of okay, not the thing you say to stop people from worrying. The real version. The one that doesn't ask you to pretend the damage isn't there. Just the one that knows, with some certainty, that you are larger than the damage. Leah called while I was still on the balcony. She wanted to know if she could bring her friend to dinner. I said of course. She asked how I was. I told her I was good. She said she knew. She could hear it. I put my phone down and watched a dog walk past on the street below, pulling hard on its leash toward something just out of view, and I smiled. I hadn't planned this life, hadn't chosen any part of how I got here. But here I was. Here was the morning. Here was the city doing its ordinary, indifferent, beautiful thing. Here was what came next.